That's the end of that section. Now I'm going to take a look at the, this is like the second part to the same section. These are U.S. senators and representatives. I did a study here of what the work effort would be to stop this crazy cycle. Okay, so we're going to take a look at one state. So let's consider a hypothetical scenario where senators and representatives have an incentive to do their jobs. So what we're thinking here is that, you know, we have 660 people denied, you know, like in 2016. We think that at least 600 of them were legitimate couples. So, you know, senators should be in shock to see that a couple from their state got denied because they're proven to be crime-free. They're approved by the USCIS. They should be in shock. And not only that, they should know, but they don't know because, you know, the Senate Committee on Immigration doesn't even know, that as you have this number of 660, it's kind of scary to terrorists on the outside and criminals. They think, wow, we could get rejected, you know, because they have this big sophisticated system, the whole of government approach. But if the senators would actually take their time to fight for you and to question your denial, then it would go down from 660 to like 60. And then that might, you know, we're thinking that might actually cause the Department of Homeland Security and Department of State to start using some other resources to actually find these target groups. So the senator's not doing anything, it's just appeasing the system. And it's giving you guys, you know, it's given them their 660 denials, which is what they want, which is about 2%. And it's, you know, messing up, you know, normal law-abiding citizens who should have the right to marry a fiance overseas. So anyways, we're going to look at the work effort here. So we think if they stop this insanity, that they would pressure the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State into actually putting some effort into finding the right people. You know, enough of them get through every year. You read about them, you know, terrorists getting through, sham marriages getting through by the hundreds, human trafficking victims coming in by the hundreds, you know, every year. But they, you know, they can't capture them, but they can capture you guys. So we're going to look here at Ohio. Okay, so Ohio has 16 representatives, and the U.S. House of Representatives has 435 members. So that's like 3.7% of the House. So Ohio here is in green. So we're going to take a look at this. So in 2014, we had 35,925 cases, and we found this on the internet. So, and there's where we found it. So 35,925 K-1 visa cases were approved, were filed, and they rejected 618. As you can see, this table here that you can look up from the USCIS, I think, they give you stats on visas. So you can drill into any visa and get the stats. Just look for this table here, non-immigrant visas issued by classification, and you can find this table. And there's not one out for 2017 yet. So we found a state, but they don't publish the number of denials, but here they set it in an article. So we know the ratio here. So if we divide 618 by 35,925, we get 98.28% approval rate. Excuse me. So if we consider that for like 2016, that gives us 660 denials. That's where we got to 660 denials yet, or, you know, based on the same ratio for a bigger population. So Ohio's share of the 660 would be, you know, their 3.7% of 660, which is about 25 cases a year. Okay. So keep in mind, look at the screen. We have 16 representatives in Ohio and 25 cases per year. So do the math there. That's like 1.5 cases a year. So, you know, we're trying to convince the U.S. House of Representatives and or the U.S. Senate to question all fiancé visa denials. And if you did this, you'd be looking at a huge work volume of 1.5 cases in a year. So they can't tell us they don't have the time to do this. Okay, they can't tell us, in some of the prior things we showed you what senators actually do. They just say, they have a protocol that they follow, and a protocol says get this form letter, put your case number in it, and send it to some consulate somewhere in the world and ask them, why this case was denied or what's the status of this case. So that's what they'll actually do, is spend 5 minutes to, paste your information, your case number and your name and your fiance's name into a form letter and send it to a consulate. You can't do that because you don't have the consulate's email addresses. I do, but you don't. So a U.S. representative, you'd be looking at 1.5 cases a year, and senators, you'd be looking like 1 case every month. So this is, crazy low work volume. So they could do better than a 5-minute job if they actually question, why was one of my citizens in my state or in my representative area, my geographical area, why were they denied? They're crime-free. They're model citizens. They were approved by the USCIS. Why did their case get denied? These guys don't even think that they should be alarmed at this. Like I said, if you're alarmed and you do something about it, you would be putting pressure on the the congressional branch to actually, you'd be putting pressure on the congressional branch to question them, and it would wind up being in the executive branch. You'd be putting pressure on them, the Department of State and Department of Homeland Security, to actually go out and find the target groups, work a little harder, think a little bit more, get rid of your consultants and get better ones. So one reason that we think a representative would be good is the geographical proximity to the U.S. petitioner. And another reason is because there's only, if you do the math anywhere, we did it for Ohio, but, the workload on any representative in the United States is still 1.5 cases per year. Okay? It's still 1.5 cases a year. Some senators would be, would have a big volume. If you go out to, where Dianne Feinstein is in California, have a population of 35 or 38 million or something like that. I forget. But California is a big state, so they would have a bigger workload for their senators, which is why a U.S. representative, I don't know. I can go back, but I have trouble going back screens when I'm recording this. But, California has a boatload of representatives, and the workload for each one of them is 1.5. Okay, so a representative, has a low volume of work, 1.5 cases a year. They're in the same geographical area as the US Citizen Petitioner. They are already tasked with helping you with government issues, even though we're talking about, the legislative branch here. So, and it says representatives, a representative is the best resource to check social media. So, if a representative wanted to, and this is something we would encourage them to do, they could say, hey, why did you deny a visa for one of our citizens? We just checked their social media. They don't look like they're not a bona fide couple to me. They look like they're good. Why did you deny them? If they did something like that, what would the Department of State do? Maybe they would say, whoops, they didn't look bona fide to us because we had to meet a quota, and this guy's telling me they look bona fide. What do we do now? So that's, what we think ought to happen. So that's the end of this topic, the workload. So very, very low workload here. If they were to get off their butts and question why a fiancé visa case was denied, they'd be helping us out because we don't want to see terrorists come into this country. So this is a case for the prosecution of the Department of State. This is something these guys aren't going to like too much, but we've already talked to our immigration lawyers who don't know a whole lot about that. We've also talked to the Department of Justice. We haven't convinced them yet. We feel that this corruption if we take a look at this slide, a fiduciary duty of this task that's in Section 104 of the INA is to assure that the policies and procedures to administer the fiancé process have a sound fundamental basis that's supported by science, best practices, and professionals. Okay, they have that duty because the Secretary of State is the one that is in charge. Right here, shall be charged with the administration and enforcement of the provisions of this act. Relating to the powers, duties, and functions of diplomatic and consular officers, except the actual decision making. But everything else they have power over. And what they decided to do was use this crazy indicator system to mark the wrong population, hand it over to a consular officer saying, we're not telling you what to do here, but this case has a lot of indicators, and if, do what you want, do what you're trained to do. And what they're trained to do is, hey, if they got a lot of indicators, they're alarmed. They're thinking, oh, wow, what's wrong here? These people have a difference in something. That's because, when you're overseas in a college, or whether you're overseas in a, in a work, for a work assignment, and you go out at night to a restaurant and you meet somebody and winds up being your fiance, you're not worried about indicators. You just meet somebody and start talking to them, and if things click, you go out on a date, and they continue to happen if things click. So nobody legitimate is worried about indicators. The only people worried about indicators are criminals. It's crazy stuff here. So we think that the indicators are just they're not working. Professionals in the field of statistics do not support the practice of using policies and procedures, including the whole of government indicators, against a large population of law-abiding citizens without using the indicators against known target groups to find out if they work. Bump this indicator like age difference up against the terrorists. Is it going to work? No. Their difference in age was 8 years. So why are you using age as an indicator at all if you can't catch terrorists? And the same with sham marriages. We're going to try to get those I-129F forms for various sham marriage people through the Freedom of Information Act. If we can't get it, one of our we've already got replies back from the FBI just saying sign this form and send it in. So, but if we can't do it, we know that the watchdog organizations can do it, because read the news. That's what watchdog organizations work with Freedom of Information Act all the time. So they're always suing the government for, if the government doesn't give them the information they ask for. So we'll get that stuff, and when we go through it and do an audit, we'll see how many sham marriages have a difference in age of more than like 2 or 3 years, like none. So what do we say here? So we say that this, the whole of government system to identify terrorists, human trafficking, sham marriage schemes, and other visa fraud criminals will never be possible using the current system. Okay. Terrorists lie, criminals lie, and other known visa fraud criminals, they all avoid indicators. And there's other ways to do this stuff. Get a good consultant and figure it out. So another thing that we mention here is the benefit of doubt. In the United States, we have this thing called the presumption of innocence. I don't know why that's not highlighted here. But in the United States, American citizens are entitled to the presumption of innocence. In other words, you're innocent until proven guilty. That's the basis of our legal system here. Okay, you're innocent until proven guilty. So, even though when your fiancé visa case gets denied, you're entered into a visa fraud database by the Department of State, both you and your fiancé, which could affect things like travel in the future and stuff like that. They're basically, finding you guilty of being involved in marriage fraud without a trial. And the reason they get away with that is, gray area. You as a United States citizen have the presumption of innocence, but your fiance doesn't. U.S. law doesn't apply to foreign countries. So this is, like I said, this is a shady thing that they do. They don't have to prove that you're not a bona fide couple. They can think that you're not a bona fide couple and deny your case. So that's the difference between a fiancé visa being a privilege, is the way they look at it, instead of a right. A right means you have the right to marry someone. They have to approve you. They look at it as, no, it's a privilege and we have to approve it. So, even though you're protected in the United States by the presumption of innocence, they get around that. They get around that by denying your visa and just saying, yeah, we're demigods. You're not going to do anything about it anyway. So what we think is, if the existence of a bona fide relationship is in doubt, if these guys weren't corrupt, they could say, I don't know, are these guys bona fide or not? They could actually say, they could put in a new policy and procedure where if they have a high number of, if a case has a high number of indicators, they could put in a policy and procedure to say, hey, we're the executive branch, but let's go to the legislative branch and let's ask a U.S. representative to check the social media and see what they say. Okay? They're never going to do that because why? Because they can't approve everybody. They have to deny some cases. This would take away those cases. But if they weren't corrupt, they would do this. They would say, hey, can you take a look at the social media? So what does that mean? Well, this is a different topic. Let me finish the last one. The representative who was in your geographical area, in the geographical area of a U.S. Citizen Petitioner, there's a good chance, there's probably not that many people working in a representative's office, maybe 5 altogether, because it's it's a small area of a state, and there's probably not that many people working there. But you've been on Facebook. You get on Facebook. Every time you get on, Facebook is trying to make you make friends with other people you don't know because you have common, you have one common friend or you have 5 common friends. If you're in some kind of a group, like an activity group, like a athletic group, you might see a lot of these kind of things coming in saying, well, you're friends with, 5 or 6 people from this group, and they're trying to, get you to make friends with all these people you don't know that are in the same group. So in your geographical area, your immediate geographical area, there's a good chance that somebody from the representative's office would have a friend that's a friend of one of your friends. And, they could say, hey, look, I just made this person a friend so I could check out their social media site. And, they're in the best position to say that your relationship looks bona fide. But that's not done. That's just an idea. That's not done. So let's go on to a different topic here. Donahue has defined, implemented, and disseminated a demigod attitude. So, it's this guy and people that came before him that decided that, marrying a foreign national is not a right of yours. It's a privilege. So that's not written in the the INA anywhere. It's not written down. That's a policy and procedure, just like this crazy indicator system. But one thing he has done is just disseminated a demigod attitude. I mean, that's how these consulates get to writing these letters saying you're denied. You don't need to know why. We're going to sit on your application until it expires, and that'll put you at least out a couple years from getting married to your fiance. And if you still want to get married by then we might decide, hey, you still want to do it after 2 or 3 years, we'll let you. That's their attitude. They're just corrupt as hell. But this demigod attitude is something that Donahue supports. Can't look at it any other way. He is the Undersecretary of State. He's a principal deputy Secretary of State. He's the #1 guy under the Secretary of State. And that's his job, to define these policies and procedures. And he decided, let's be demigods. Let's be IRS-like. Donahue somehow feels that he has the right to deny a fiancé visa to legitimate couples and not bother telling them why they were denied or what options the couple has. That's something you can blame directly on him. That's policies and procedures. It's not written in the law. He just made these policies and procedures. He made these forms, or he's responsible for them. Well, you know, they might have been made by his predecessor, but they're still there. The forms that say, you know, we're demigods, your case was denied, go to hell, you know, we don't care what you do, your case is denied, we're returning it, but we're sitting on it for 4 or 5 months first. So, you know, that is just pure corruption. So we think it's time for an attitude, you know, adjustment for the Department of State, the same as the IRS. So he knows that his pathetic policies and procedures could not identify a terrorist. Okay, you know, not even if he or she is carrying an ISIS flag and holding an AK-47. He couldn't tell that because his indicator system says no indicators. He knows that the other target groups, sham marriages, victims of human trafficking, and other visa criminals, have absolutely no issues slipping through the system. He's got to know that because, you know, because he reads the paper and he sees what ICE captures every month. And he knows that all these people that ICE is getting slip through the system. But he has no issue sitting in front of a Senate committee and misleading the committee into thinking his people are doing a good job. You know, that's corruption too. I mean, maybe he didn't lie in that meeting, but, you know, he swore to tell the truth and the whole truth. The whole truth means, you know, we don't have robust indicators overseas. No, the whole truth would be we are incapable of identifying the target groups. They can't say that because, you know, every terrorist in the world would get into the United States. He refuses to recognize a presumption of innocence. We just went over this. I'm just going over all the things that Donahue is responsible for. He's never audited a known population of terrorists and criminals against his insane indicator system to determine if the system is capable of identifying terrorists and criminals. If he did, he would know that it's not capable because these people are in the country and they got here, they got through his system. He has never audited denied cases. Okay, this is another issue that, you know, we're going to talk about in some detail. If you took an audit of, say, those let's go back a few years. We started with 2015. So if you go back to 2015 when there were 500 cases denied and we're doing a real conservative estimate saying that 400 of them were legitimate. If, you know, these people, if you go back to 2015 and look at all the cases that were denied and see what they're doing now, well, what happened is eventually they probably got married. You know, but they maybe they applied for another fiancé visa and got denied. Then they had to, you know, continue traveling across the world to see each other, and then they wound up getting married and applying for a spousal visa, and they got that. And they wound up being married. But how much money did they spend? How much money did they lose from, you know, losing money on a, you know, this is, you know, the fiancé visa. It's like that crazy show on TV. Only it's usually not crazy people. It's a 90-day visa. Your fiance has 90 days to come into the United States and get married, or they go back to their country. So, you know, that means if you're going to have wedding arrangements, you know, anybody that knows something about throwing a wedding, you just can't find a place, you know, in 30 days. So you have to book weddings ahead of time. So a lot of people lose money from wedding deposits and all kinds of other things that go along with wedding planning and you know, maybe an engagement party or something like that, or other kinds of parties. They lose all kinds of monies there. They lose money from travel. They lose money from a lot of people, you know, call a lawyer, an immigration law firm. Then they got denied. You know, they might call a law firm. So they get all kinds of costs that are due to them in our eyes. You know, they should get refunded by the Department of State. You know, if you're a criminal and you're in prison and you are wrongly convicted and you're in prison for 10 years, when you get out, you get a nice little paycheck, you know, from the state to put you in prison. Fiancé visa people, they get denied. They go through, you know, years of financial hardship. They don't get any compensation. You know, it's not like I'm due any compensation. I'm thinking, you know, that's what we need to get for you people. So he's never compensated people for financial losses. So here I do some numbers. I had this wrong the last time I looked at it. I think I changed it. So let's say that a couple, back to 2015, we're looking at here, 5 years ago. So, well, I don't know, 5 years ago wasn't, I don't know what I based this on. I put this together. So let's say that the couple spent 3 years fighting to be together, and the costs were $15,000 in legal expenses, which it's kind of modest for calling a law firm to do stuff for you. Another $10,000 in travel expenses for 3 years, $50,000 a year for lost income from a spouse for $150,000, and that's kind of modest, $50,000 a year for 3 years. That's $215,000 that cost this couple. Now, if you figure, that 400 of the 500 cases that were denied were legit couples, that means Donahue, him and his Department of State, they owe these couples that were denied in 2015 $86 million. That's just for 1 year. Okay, that's for 2015, even though I said 5 years ago. It was 2015 that I did the numbers on here. So that's $86 million for 1 year, and then you're looking at more than that in 2016, more than that in 2017. Maybe I did go back 5 years. But anyways, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here that the State Department owes citizens for wrongful denials. So he blatantly institutes policies that are not in the INA, like holding on to the 129F. That's a policy. That's his policy. That's not written anywhere that, they're supposed to. What's written is what you saw before. They're supposed to return that form to the USCIS for review. Okay? But when they hold on to it for 4 or 5 months, it only takes 4 or 5 days to return a visa. When it takes 4 or 5 months, something's corrupt. He's responsible for that too. That's one of his policies. So the way we look at it, Donahue, he needs to be prosecuted for corruption because everything that he does is corrupt. And, this guy ought to be, arrested by the Department of Justice. That's our viewpoint. Some of the other members. Okay, so that's the end of that topic. Now we're going to do a little spiel on senators and representatives. It probably wouldn't surprise too many people that senators and representatives are also corrupt people. So they're in blue and black here. So we're going to show you some cases. Robert Menendez is still in the news today, and this goes back to he's going to get another trial, and I just read there's going to be some new stuff and old stuff in there. They're going to try to put this guy away for a long, long time after a couple of hung juries. But this is just the same thing. I'm going to flip through some pages here. You can pause the video and read them. And this is after seeing several pages there of senators and representatives who are now in federal penitentiaries. This is America's viewpoint of Congress. This is from CBS News. Americans' view of Congress, throw them out. A majority of people don't like their own senators for the first time ever. Majority of Americans see Congress as out of touch and corrupt. Congress and the public. So, we don't think that much of Congress people and, of senators and representatives. We don't think that much of Congress as U.S. citizens. Does Congress care about public opinion? Yeah, when they're being reelected, they care. Other than that. So here's something. This is the Department of Justice, and this is a report that they make to Congress every year, and I couldn't find more recent ones. But, that usually means I just didn't look hard enough. So this is a report to Congress on the activities and operations of public integrity section for 2015. So if you see here on the upper right, federal officials charged 458. This is during 1 year, 2015. Convicted 402, awaiting trial 153. So this is just at the federal level. The other is state and local. So we showed you a bunch of pages of people from the Department of Homeland Security, people from ICE, people from the USCIS, and people from the Department of State, and then recently members of Congress who get arrested and convicted. That's a drop in the bucket because 458 are charged by the Department of Justice every year. We're talking some pretty good numbers here on corruption. You know, you read about this stuff all the time. 458 charged, 402 convicted, 153 waiting trial. Still some of them from 2014, obviously, because those numbers don't add up. So, and then we have this here's just a couple of reports that I wanted to show you. I'm not going to spend too much time going into them. But the Department of Homeland Security on the left, with the graphic with the NASA-looking picture, and on the right, the Department of State. They both have an Office of Inspector General. We mentioned this before. So the Office of Inspector General is set up to basically, you know, watch over their departments. Like the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security, their job is to keep tabs on the Department of Homeland Security and, you know, find fraud and corruption and, you know, inadequate, you know, inappropriate spending and stuff like that. So they put out reports too. These might not result in some kind of charge from the Department of Justice. It just might be a smack in the hands and a fine or something like that. But this happens too, in addition to the last page that you saw. So clearly the federal government in the United States is a pretty corrupt government. And that's the end of this topic.